For those who have joined us before, thank you for coming back. For those who are new, welcome. Just as a reminder, we solicit the questions beforehand, so we won't be able to answer any questions that are posted in the chat, but we will share resources in there, and we've got a good list of questions to go through today. We are going to shift up the format a little bit. We have been trying some different things in terms of getting to people where they are and on the platforms that they're using. And also, as we continue to decentralize further, we want to make sure that we are highlighting various members of different teams. Hedera is really, a community. There's a community around developers. There's a community around HBAR. There's all these wonderful things. And as we become more and more distributed, we will be sharing different parts of that community. So we won't do these on a regular monthly basis. We will still, do engagements with Mance and Leemon on a quarterly basis. And then on the other months, we will feature some other folks and test out some different formats and see what the response is. And the ones that the community really likes, we will do more of those. And the ones that you say, no, don't do that again, we won't do. So with that, let's get started. This is a question, Mance, that we get all the time. And when will there be a new governing council member announcement?
Yeah, well, this is interesting timing, wasn't it? So if you haven't seen it, we had an announcement this morning. London School of Economics is the newest council member. News was released today. Very excited to have LSE on board. Of course, they're one of the top 10 institutions globally for economics and the work that they do. We're going to be working with them and their students and their network of partners on various projects and doing research and other things. So very glad to have LSE on board. And I would just say, stay tuned for other announcements as they come.
All right. Yes, we are very excited to have them on board. I would encourage anyone who hasn't read the press release yet to take a look at that. Some of the social initiatives and how they can use blockchain for good are very exciting, and we're excited to work with them and the other council members on those. Leemon, we do also always get questions on Swirlds and Hedera. So does Swirlds still work on developing the Hashgraph algorithm? Other than as a council member, how does Swirlds contribute to Hedera?
Sure. So Swirlds and Hedera both have engineers that are working on the Hashgraph, the ledger itself, the Hedera ledger. And so the ledger does lots of different things. It takes the transactions, it puts them in order by gossiping among all the computers, and they all do consensus to put them in order. All of that is the platform. And then they interpret the transactions. So if your transaction says move some HBARs or move a token, it actually moves the HBARs or a token. Those are the services. And so we have the platform and the services, and engineers from both companies are working on both, but you tend to have more of the Swirlds engineers working on platform and more of the Hedera engineers working on the services. But they are continuing to build the system, adding more features. Stay tuned as new things come. And then the algorithm itself, I'm always thinking about and always thinking of tweaks. And then aside from the Hashgraph algorithm proper, there's a whole bunch of other algorithms and a whole bunch of other data structures. And we're constantly inventing new algorithms and new data structures and making it faster and better and giving it more abilities. So yeah, we're all working on that very hard.
Yes, both those teams are quite busy. Mance, can you talk a little bit more about the customer engagement model? In the past, I know we've all talked about the fact that you don't need to let us know if you're building on Hedera. That's great. You can do that completely on your own. And we've also talked about the fact that Hedera will expand through, anticipated higher traffic and growth in traffic. So can you help, the community understand and reconcile these two statements?
Sure. Well, technically, it's the case. Anybody that wants to use the network, as long as they have HBAR, they can build an application or a dApp that makes API calls to any one of the nodes, pay for the API call. There's no account number that you have to create or identity registration process that you have to go through to interact with the network in that way. And so from a technical perspective, If you want to use the network or build on top of the network, you could just do it, and we're never involved. We don't need to know. Now, that's different from how we actually go to market, and the activities that we are engaged in with potential users and users of the network. What I would say is that there are really multiple efforts underway. There are the activities that the marketing team performs that are sort of broad-based, and that grows the ecosystem, that grows the developer network at large. So there are those types of activities that engage the developer community. Separate from that, there is a business development team that has what I call a high touch model, or has had a high touch engagement model, where they will work directly with potential big users of the network. And it's not always big users. I mean, there are a lot of enterprises that there's this high touch model that we use with, but small, medium businesses, startups, for some subset of potential partners or users of the network, the BD team is engaged in working with those organizations. That's changing, and it was intended to change. And actually, there's another question a little later that I'm going to come back to on this, but that model of engagement is changing, and it's moving to a low touch model, and that has everything to do with the way that we're scaling. So you know what, rather than go into the details of that, I'm going to hold it. But that's what we mean when we say that we engage with the community, and it's not inconsistent at all with the technical fact that anybody that wants to use the network can do so without our involvement.
All right, we will stay tuned for more. Leemon, you recently answered a question about publishing source code, and you mentioned talking about the bottom layer of the hash graph and an upper layer. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean there?
Sure. So all the source code is published, and it's useful to look at the software in layers. Software always gets developed in layers, and what you end up doing is you say, well, there's this layer, and then we wrote some more software that calls that layer, that uses that layer as a tool, as a library. And there's another layer that uses those two layers as a library and as tools. And so you just kind of view it as layers on top of each other. So for us, for a public ledger, what you do is you say at the bottom layer, we have our mainnet nodes that will accept transactions and then gossip them among each other and come to consensus on them. They use the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. They come to consensus on what is the order of these transactions and what are their timestamps. So it's useful to think of that as the bottom layer. A second ago, I called that the platform layer. Then on top of that, now that we all know the order of the transactions, we can interpret them and validate them in order and update the state. And so if you had a transaction that was transferring some HBARs, the bottom layer, the platform layer, put them all in order, and it figured out which of your transactions. Like if you have one coin but you try to send it two different places, that's two different transactions. They'll both get put in the consensus order. Then at the next layer up, at the services layer, we actually look at those two transactions and we say, well, first you gave it to Alice, then you gave one to Bob, but you only had one coin. Because you gave it to Alice first, we will now change the state to transfer to Alice. And because by the time you were giving it to Bob, you had already run out of money, we will not give any HBARs to Bob. And so it's at the services layer that the transactions are interpreted, are validated, and the state is updated. And so you could say there's those two layers. And you could say there's other layers too, in some sense. There's the mirror nodes, which then remember everything that's ever happened and answer the questions for the public from a database of everything that's ever happened on the network with cryptographic proofs of it. And you could say we have this ecosystem of tools and SDKs and all of those things. Those are sort of a layer. You could talk about all sorts of layers of software. But usually we talk about the bottom two layers as the platform and the services, and everything has been published. So the platform layer, every month when we update the running code on the ledger, on the mainnet nodes, that day or the next day, we release the published source code that corresponds to the new object code that we just put there. So the program that is running on the network is always in sync with this GitHub repo that has all that source code. This is open review. Anyone can download it and read it and review it, give suggestions, whatever. And so that's the bottom layer of the platform. The services layer is actually continuously released. So as we're making changes, as we are, every little commit, you're watching that happen. And that's an open source code base that the whole world can see. And you can also make contributions and suggestions there. Then, of course, we also have on the side the HIP process, which is how you can officially request a feature. And the community has done a great job of suggesting some incredibly good features and then debating back and forth about exactly how it should be implemented. And then we've implemented them. And so the HIP process is how the community as a whole is guiding the development of Hedera and what direction it goes. So those are some of the layers that we have. All the source is published, and feel free to read through it. And also feel free to get involved in, you can make suggestions on the source code, but you can also make suggestions for new features through the HIP process.
Great, thank you, Leemon. Mance, I'm sure people have in their minds what governing council meetings look like. Of course, we publish the minutes, but has the governing council encountered any notable disputes over the vision during the time that it's been in existence? And if so, how did they get resolved?
Yeah, it's interesting in thinking about this question and, just reviewing the past couple of years. When it comes to overarching vision of the platform and its direction, there haven't been any real disputes on the vision itself. Now, having said that, the council is involved in a lot of strategic decisions in the pursuit of that vision. And sure, there's a lot of vigorous debate, vigorous discussion around many of those various decisions. What we wanted was to have strongly opinionated people on the council to voice those opinions, right? So when thinking about the governance models in general, a centralized decision-making model is always going to be more efficient, but is often not going to result in as good of a decision-making process, or the decisions may not be as good as those decisions that come from a decentralized decision-making process that is less efficient, meaning it takes longer. It's often painful because it takes longer, right? In this world of startups. But the result is that the decisions typically are better decisions. Where you end up is better than it would have been if you didn't have the group in a vigorous discussion. So disagreement and varied opinions are absolutely valued. They were expected. That's kind of the point of this model. And so, I'm not going to go into any specific, what do we argue about? But yeah, there are plenty of arguments. It's not conflict. I wouldn't say that it's a conflict, but there's certainly a lot of debate.
Thanks, Mance. And yeah, it's interesting to see, these council members come from such different industries and backgrounds and experiences, and they all bring that to bear in these decisions. So we get to benefit from their collective wisdom.
They've really been impressed with our council, both with their expertise and with their willingness to be involved. It has been fantastic, both in the council, the official council meetings, and then also in all these committees that we have. The council members get involved, they have these ideas, they come from different perspectives, and what we end up with is far better than if just a single person were making all the decisions. We really have seen the council working well. So, the ledger is all about consensus. Well, the consensus within the council really does say two heads are better than one, and we end up with much better decisions than we would if we weren't decentralized. It has worked well.
Yeah, and we're going to do a marketing team Twitter Spaces, I believe, next week. And on that, we will talk a little bit about how marketing works with the council. And they are absolutely, they are engaged. They are a pleasure to work with. They are responsive. So we'll share a little more insights on that next week. Leemon, does slightly more than 33% of HBAR need to remain in Treasury forever to ensure the absolute security of the network from attack?
No, it's in some sense the opposite of that. So right now we're on this path to decentralization. Right now, everything is permissioned. That means that we give nodes permission to run. Right now it's council nodes. The next step will be bringing community nodes in, but those will be permissioned. And at that point, it doesn't matter where the coins are. We can have security as long as more than 2/3 of these permission nodes that we trust are good. then we're fine. So it doesn't matter where the coins are. The next step after having community nodes is to have anonymous nodes. When you do that, you want to make sure that your HBARs are widely distributed and it's hard for an attacker to get all of them. Now, you could do that by having all the coins in treasury, but that's not the best solution because ultimately they won't be, and you wouldn't want to start anonymous nodes and then later have to turn it off. So really, to have anonymous nodes, what you want is to get all the coins out of treasury into the market and see that they are widely distributed, that it is hard and expensive for one person to try to corner the market and get all the coins. Then you feel confident going to anonymous nodes and staying with anonymous nodes forever, permissionless nodes forever. So if we don't do permissionless nodes, then it doesn't matter where the coins are. The 1/3 doesn't matter. If we do want to do permissionless nodes, well, sure, it'd be secure if we kept all the coins, but we don't plan to keep all the coins forever. And so we wouldn't want to do permissionless nodes until the coins are distributed, which means as the coins become distributed, we are taking steps closer to having the permissionless anonymous nodes. So it is actually good if we could get treasury down to nothing. That would be a step towards having anonymous nodes, permissionless nodes. But yeah, mathematically, you're safe, of course, as long as there's a 1/3 in treasury, but you're also safe as long as you're permissioned. And as long as you're permissioned, you don't need a 1/3 in treasury. And if you want to go to non-permissioned, although a 1/3 in treasury would keep you safe in some sense, you wouldn't have that in the long term. And so you don't want it in the short term. You want to make sure that the day we go permissionless, treasury is widely distributed enough that we can really be sure that it's safe to do so.
Great. Thank you, Leemon. Mance, going back to the governing council for just a minute, it's hard to believe, but some governing council members are coming up on the end of their initial 3-year term. And we've talked a lot about, the fact that they can do an additional term. How does that work? Does the rest of the council vote on that? And then, related to council, are there standards by which governing council members are selected? And can we share more details on that?
Yeah, so I think Lena is going to post into the chat, maybe she already has, yes, a link to the LLC agreement. If you look down to the appendixes, I think it's on page 36, there is the listing of council members and their expiration dates when their memberships would, the first term anyway, would end. It's actually the case that the first batch of council members term is not going to end until December 31st of 23. We're still a couple of years away. So it's not as it seems that it's like right around the corner. Having said that, when it does come time, the process is that there is a membership committee that will be very active at that stage. And for those council members that want to have a second term, presumably maybe all of them would want to have a second term, what's required is that the membership committee propose that those members have a second term, and 2/3 of the existing council members need to vote in favor of that. So as long as 2/3 of the council votes in favor of extending a term, then that term would get extended. The idea is that we will have, 1/3 of the council coming up for renewal every year, or approximately. And so it's, or maybe it's actually could even be less than that, depending on how things worked out. But nevertheless, the details of all of that are in the agreement, the LLC agreement, including the schedule. You're welcome to take a look and see the specific numbers.
All right. Thanks, Mance. Leemon, a use case question for you. You've mentioned gaming as a great example of something that could be built on Hedera, and in particular, a leaderboard, a solution for leaderboard cheating. So if, in essentially real time, I try to, I don't like to say shoot, I try to hug you and you dodge. How does this Hedera assist in this process given 3 to 5 seconds time to finality?
Yes. What if I try to hug you with extreme prejudice? So what we do, actually, these are two separate things. Leaderboard and dodging are entirely separate things. We do have people looking at leaderboard cheating as a thing that Hedera can help with. So the idea is that leaderboard, of course, says who has won the most games, or who won a game with the most points, or who solved the puzzle with the most points, or whatever. The leaderboard is somehow a ranking of all the players. So the leaderboard only gets updated at the end of the game. It's not a I shoot and you dodge and therefore the leaderboard updates. I'm talking about the leaderboard of who has won and what your history, your track record of winning and losing is, or your points, or who has the highest score so far. There are real problems in online games of people hacking into the leaderboard and just magically changing their score to be 1 billion, or adding their name to the list when they didn't even play the game. They just get their name added to the leaderboard. It is exactly the kind of thing that ledgers are good at, right? A leaderboard is source of information that everyone can see. We want to make sure we're all seeing the same thing. We're going to make sure that it only updates according to what it should update to. And so we want to have controlled mutability. It's exactly what we would have. And so if you have the right keys, you can update it, and otherwise you can't, and hackers can't get in, can't go in and change it. So that's what leaderboard hacking is. Hedera is an obvious solution for that. I'm going to tell you 3 things that it's good for, but these things are different. Shooting and dodging is different from the leaderboard, and leaderboard is an obvious application. A second obvious application are in-game assets of various kinds. Anything in a game that is a limited resource. You have the magic armor, or you have the super spaceship, or whatever. These are things that people in the real world right now buy and sell, and they're worth a lot of money. And maybe they're just seen on the computer of the game company, and maybe that computer is not terribly secure, and maybe you don't trust the game company and they could steal your assets or whatever. It'd be far better to have an NFT, a real NFT for these things. And again, the way it would work is that when I want to hand you something in the game, I would do so by, I'm going to give you a certain number of gold coins and you're going to give me your spaceship. I think I'm mixing genres there. I give you a certain number of gold coins and you give me your magic sword. If we do that, we do it as an atomic transaction where my gold coins and your magic sword are both NFTs, and you go to Hedera and you swap tokens. This is a great application as well. And then you don't have to trust the game company to do the right thing. The things that are of real value are of real value. You can even talk about building something like a metaverse where lots of different people are involved in it, and the things of value are not controlled by any one person. They're controlled by a decentralized ledger. So Hedera is controlling those. That's a second place where games are useful. The third place where games can be used with Hedera is real time, dodging and whatever, or we're playing lots of little short games, even just playing lots of chess games if you wanted to. And the way you would do this, I think I had years ago, I did a podcast where I talked about this, or an interview or something. The way you'd want to do it is structure it as a large sequence of very short games where this group of people are playing the games. And at the end of each short game, they all jointly digitally sign something saying, here's who won and lost this short little game, or here's how many points each of us won and lost, or here's how things transferred, reputation scores transferred, or gold coins transferred during this one little short game. And so if a group of people are playing against each other, a whole sequence of these, so maybe every 30 seconds you have a short little game that involves shooting and dodging. All the players digitally sign what happened. And so because they all signed it, eventually it goes into ledger, minutes later, hours later, eventually you send the ledger a summary of what happened. That'd be fine. It's almost like an L2 system. If one player decides to cheat, if they say, yes, I lost that, but I don't want a millionth of a reputation point to go from me to you, I quit, and they turn off the computer without even signing it, and you don't get everybody signing the outcome, then that one little last mini game of 10 seconds long just doesn't count. But the game ends, that player is no longer playing, they've lost the ability to interact with these other players. If you play one long 2-hour game, somebody might rage quit at the end without signing, and that's a bad thing, which is why I recommend not structuring it where all the points get settled after 2 hours. I say settle the points every 10 seconds. And then if somebody rage quits, all they do is undo 10 seconds of results. But as long as everyone agrees it's playing what happened in the last 10 seconds, then everybody signs it. And then eventually a transaction will go to Hedera that records what happened. And since it was signed by everybody, you can't go back and retroactively change the past more than 10 seconds ago. All you can do is undo the last seconds by quitting, and then you can't play anymore. And there's a motivation not to do that. So those are the three levels, three of many levels, where I see Hedera playing a role in online gaming. We can do things like preventing cheating, hacking of the leaderboard. That's shared information that can be controlled mutability, controlled by passwords and keys and all the normal things that you do. And then we can have shared assets of value. So in-game assets of various sorts. And then we also have real-time things. And the real-time things are for small groups of people that are involved in the particular match, continually digitally signing a summary of what's happened so far. And then the worst that can ever happen is someone rage quits, that ends the game. Or maybe you say, as long as a certain number keep playing, we'll just take their word for it. And a third can rage quit, or a quarter, or 2/3 can rage quit. It will be okay. Whatever you want to set it up as. But then they can't retroactively prevent the points they lost or the gold they lost earlier in the game. So long answer, I think gaming is a really exciting application for Hedera. And I would love to see the community building lots of really cool games on Hedera.
Thanks, Leemon. Given how much time my children would spend online gaming if they could, I would agree. Mance, the next one we have has been the topic of a lot of conversation all over the industry. How does Hedera engage with policymakers, specifically in the US, as there's a lot of chatter here these days?
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. I mean, especially in recent weeks, there's been a lot of conversation, debate, things happening at the national level, things happening at the state level. And what's clear is that there's a desperate need for education to policymakers, whether those be regulators or people in Congress, that sort of thing. We have opportunities that present themselves to us where we can go in and do exactly that for those types of individuals, and we do some of that. It's also the case that we're involved in organizations that are focused on that. We're one of the founding members of the Texas Blockchain Council here in Texas. And they were successful this year in getting legislation passed here in Texas that is quite meaningful. Go check it out. If you just Google Texas Blockchain Council, you'll find the website and see what's going on there. Of course, we're members of the Digital Chamber in DC and work through them to achieve certain goals, policy goals, and et cetera. So it's just a broad range of activities that we're involved in. And as you pointed out, that activity is certainly heating up in recent months and weeks.
Great. Thank you, Mance. Yes, so more in-depth, tons of education, no rage tweeting at any particular congressperson, please.
We'll let them rage against each other.
Yeah, they seem to be doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, Leemon, if Hedera can, generally be considered as a technology for good, is it incumbent on the governing council to ensure that organizations that have bad intentions do not or cannot build on top of Hedera?
Well, no, we're a utility. We don't know who is using the utility. We don't know what it's being used for. Should your electric company ensure that no bad people use their electricity? Or should the phone company ensure that no bad people talk through their phone system? I don't think it's possible, and I'm not sure that's what you want. Do you really want your water utility to not give you water if they think you're a bad person? We're planning to be the trust layer of the internet for the planet. Now, what we can do is prevent you from doing malicious lying in certain ways. We can prevent you from stealing tokens from people in certain ways. We can be a good trust layer so that if someone honest is building on top of us, they can build something that you can trust in many ways, even if they're dishonest. They're forced to be honest in some ways. That we can do. But as for censoring organizations that are bad, well, we don't even know they're using us, and we wouldn't want to censor them. So we can't, and we wouldn't want to. That's the basic answer.
All right. Thanks, Leon. Mance, the next one, I think, was what you were alluding to a little bit earlier. Is Hedera considering funding projects that want to build on the network? And how do we go about applying for that, doing that, et cetera?
Yeah. So the simple answer is yes. The simple answer is yes, but it's not a simple answer. This is one of those topics that has been worked on extensively by the council. In fact, there was a task force that was created specifically to address this topic. And a lot of work has gone on for most of this year to come up with a satisfactory answer for how to enable this in a way that is going to work for the community, for growth of the community. So what I'm not prepared to do today is announce the details of that, except to say that there are details that are forthcoming, and a full answer to this question is going to be made known and announced in the not too distant future. So this has been a big work effort by a large number of council members and a special task force. Just stay tuned.
Thanks, Mance. Leemon, can Hedera do offline transactions? And if so, how would that work?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what offline transactions would mean here. You can create a transaction, but until you talk to the network, of course, it can't be processed. The important thing is the way we do fairness is that if I create, a transaction that's like a bid in an auction today, but I never tell anybody about it, I only tell them about it tomorrow, then I should only get credit for having bid tomorrow. I shouldn't get credit for having done it a day early. So you can create transactions offline. You can get all your friends to sign it. You can get it prepared, but only when you actually submit it and it reaches most of the network does it kind of count as having occurred. Now, if you don't care about the order, then that doesn't even matter. But if you care about the order, then you care about when it counts as having occurred, and it will count as having occurred when it's reached the majority of the network. It's the median of the time received of all the computers, which is the fair way of assigning the timestamp. So yeah, you can create things offline. You can do L2 networks that have summaries that they create. I just talked about a game application where you do things sort of offline. But then when you finally submit it, that's when you get credit for it. That's when it actually occurs on the network. And it's when you reach a majority of the nodes, which is the fair way of doing it.
Great. Mance, big question here. What are you most focused on right now?
So, it's interesting. Figuring out what not to focus on is one of the hardest parts of the job. There are a lot of demands on time and attention, and understanding where to place one's focus in this particular role is a challenge, often a challenge. What I can say is that for all of this year, really going back to the beginning of January, a strong focus has been on how to further decentralize the organization and unlock the potential and the opportunity for growing the ecosystem with our resources. And so this relates back to the prior answer in the work with the task force, a task force that had been created to understand how to do exactly that. It's consumed my time by and large for most of this year. And again, there'll be more details forthcoming.
All right. Leemon, how sticky is a deployment of an app or an appnet on Hedera? Is it feasible for somebody to move to a competing DLT platform once it is deployed on Hedera?
Sure, it's easy. It's also easy to move the other direction, to move to Hedera. But if it's a Solidity smart contract, well, it runs on anything that runs Solidity. If you've created an appnet that's running on Hyperledger and you have us as the plugin, so it's really running on us, then you could run it on, well, actually maybe it's kind of hard to, no one else is supporting that. But if other ledgers eventually support it, it'd be easy to switch. But whatever your application is, if you have tokens, you could move them somewhere else. It's also easy to move here. The only problem is that if you get used to the high speed of Hedera and you rely on it, then you kind of can't move to a slower one. Or if you're used to the low prices, the very low fees on Hedera, and you build your business around it, then it's kind of hard to move to an expensive one. Or if you're used to the predictable pricing, as the price of HBAR goes up and down, the price in dollars of our transactions doesn't go up and down. So you build your company on an assumption of a certain cost model that's predictable. Then, maybe moving to an unpredictable ledger would be hard. So there are, in those senses, it's hard to move to a less good ledger. But technically, it's easy to move to other ledgers, and you can move to Hedera very easily too. We're seeing lots of people do that. Lots of people are coming to Hedera.
We are indeed. It's very exciting. Mance, we've talked about 2021 being the year of scale. In your opinion, as we get into the second half of the year, how is the progress on that versus your expectations at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I would say we're certainly on track, if not ahead of where I expected to be. It is a simple answer. Now, let me add a little color. At the beginning of the year, actually, this goes back to one of the earlier answers when I talked about our engagement model. One of the things that we do is engage with potential partners or users of the network. Often these are big enterprise. When that happens, we bring in a system integrator, and the system integrator is involved in actually building out the solution in question. Not always, but quite often that's the case. These can be global system integrators, largest SIs on a global basis. They can be smaller SIs that are, have a focus on the DLT space, but they, through the process, end up becoming experts on the platform, on how to use the Hedera platform. When we started the year, there were just a handful, a few, that we really felt like were engaged and expert in the use of the platform, that they could go off and do whatever they wanted with other customers or users of the network. And over just, this is August. Since the beginning of the year, we've gone from bringing large opportunities to these SIs and working with the SIs through the process of building out those solutions, to now having literally dozens of SIs that are engaged to some degree, and a majority of those are competent in the network, in the use of the APIs and how to build dApps on top of the network. But more importantly, or as importantly, is that there are dozens of projects that we have nothing to do with that they now are bringing to the platform. That's scale, right? That's how you scale. Now, we're still early. We're still very early in this process, but the snowball is rolling, is the point, right? And when I talked about moving from a high-touch engagement model to a low-touch engagement model, it's exactly in this manner, where the SIs, a lot of them, frankly, had been building their practices on permissioned private networks using the frameworks that we all know, right, that are not public, and have decided that it's maybe even more important to move to building applications and their practices on a public network. And we have benefited directly from that. Just macro level changes in the market have moved in our direction. And those organizations that had been focused on enterprise and other high volume use cases for private networks now think public is the way to go. So all of that is positive news for us. And we're not seeing it yet in the TPS. TPS, frankly, is a trailing indicator. And that's an important point, right? You have leading indicators of progress, you have trailing indicators of progress. TPS is a trailing indicator because it only happens when projects get deployed. But what I am seeing, and I've shared with you just now, are some leading indicators of the kind of traction and growth that we hoped and expected to see this year, and it's happening.
Very exciting. Thanks, Mance. Leemon, how will Hedera ensure that digital money will always be a private, limited supply, universal medium of exchange? instead of a variable supply like with fiat and a conditional medium of exchange?
Great question. So 3 years ago, when we launched the network, we created 50 billion HBARs, 50 gigabars, and it will never have a single HBAR created again. So it is a fixed supply of HBARs, and we're committed to keeping it fixed for eternity. And I would argue there is no reason to expand it. Inflation is a bad thing. And when you can divide an HBAR into 100 million pieces, you don't need it for liquidity and useful. There's reasons to want to subdivide things where you can subdivide to your heart's content. So it is a fixed supply. I think that is incredibly important. Not only that, when you build tokens on top of Hedera, the person building the token has the choice. At the moment they create it, do I want to eternally commit to never having my supply chain change, or do I want to create right now some admin keys that allow you to mint and burn tokens? They can do it either way, but they can't change their mind. At the very beginning, when you create the token, you are forced to make this decision. Do I have a fixed supply or a variable supply? And you can never change your mind. If it is a fixed supply, it will be fixed forever. You can't later come back and inflate it. Because you're buying and selling these tokens, you're giving them to people, you're making a commitment. I will never inflate, and so, or deflate. And so you commit at the beginning, and then Hedera ensures that that will happen. On the other hand, maybe you want to create one that is variable. Maybe it's not all that important. Maybe it's not in money. Maybe it's just digital tokens for a game or something, and you want to have the right to mint more and burn them. So fine, when you create it, you do that. Your users know that you've done that. It's visible to everyone, total transparency. People know that here's the key that's able to create new tokens and delete the existing tokens. There's no surprises, and then you have that ability. So Hedera, again, is just a utility that lets you do what you want. But once you've decided what you want, we enforce it, and we enforce transparency. Everyone knows the rules of the game before they start playing the game. That's what's important.
Thanks, Leemon. Mance, compared to some other projects, we see fewer global members of the Hedera community. And I know we have it, I know you'll talk about it, but this person believes there's no active marketing from Hedera council members to support the project. Will we see more announcements on new implementation successes?
Yeah, so there are a couple aspects to this question that are worth sort of pointing out. When we think back to the beginning of the council, February of 19 is when we added the first 5 members of the council. Even in that initial group, there was a mix. There were those that already had projects in mind for what they wanted to do, and they had, at that point, they were still envisioning them. They hadn't yet even begun building them, but they knew pretty much what they wanted to do, and they started building. But a lot of those council members, and even through the additional batch that we added through 2019, I think we got to 10 council members by the end of 2019, if I recall correctly. A lot of them were joining because they wanted to see what was going to happen with the space, the whole DLT category. And by joining us, they got a front row seat into that. And they got the added bonus of helping to shape our product roadmap, et cetera, all the value points for being a council member. But they didn't know how they wanted to go to market. They were still figuring it out. That's changed, or is in the process of changing. A lot of the council members that were observing now understand they have to move, and they're moving, and they have been for some time. It really accelerated starting January this year. There was a lot of it that was starting, say, Q1 and Q2 of last year. COVID hit, people slowed down, innovation departments around the world just kind of came to a stop while the world focused on their core businesses just to survive the crash that happened. But in January of this year, things changed, and these organizations decided to become very active and start building their products and services that they had put on hold. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that when it comes to marketing specifically, small and medium businesses and startups for sure, they will always, almost always say, they'll go out with press as soon as they can because they're trying to bootstrap interest in the company in the first place. All right. They got to bootstrap awareness that they exist. And, there are a lot of reasons why it's important to get that awareness just to be able to get the next round of funding, so that you can have a product that you go to market with. When it comes to big enterprise or mature organizations, generally, it's exactly the opposite. They don't go to market with press until they have everything that's fully baked. And if it's an ecosystem play, the ecosystem has been created and that business network has proven out the product or service, and they're collectively ready to go to market. So to have that caliber of organization make forward-looking statements to the market just doesn't happen generally. And what's interesting is that even in the face of what's normal, we have had that happen with some of our council members. Standard Bank is a great example, right? Standard Bank has not yet gone to market with the tokenization of bond issuances that they intend to do, right? Those are kind of forward-looking statements. They've already announced to the market what their intentions are, not having yet gone to market with the product. So that's unusual, and they did it. FPOS, same thing. FPOS, the debit card infrastructure organization for Australia, they've talked a lot about what their intentions are. DLA Piper is an example of one that has gone to market, and now that they've gone to market, there's quite a substantial amount of marketing that they're doing, and it's on an ongoing basis. So ServiceNow is not a council member, but an enterprise that has done a POC with Hedera that connects service agreements, SLAs, service level agreements, and the triggers within those SLAs to HCS. They talked about that in a blog post. So the fact that organizations are willing to do that even prior of that caliber, even prior to having the products ready to go, is a statement in itself. But that's kind of the dynamic. You wouldn't expect the more mature organizations to do this until they're ready to go to market.
All right, thanks, Mance. And I think my video was frozen. I'm going to pause it again, but can you guys hear me?
Yes, we're all good.
Great.
Except your video.
Yeah, I'll fix that. Okay, Leemon, for a while there was an increasing time to finality. Will the time to finality get longer for the network?
Oh, it went down a lot last month, and it'll go down again. So what we have is that we keep adding features. It may affect the time to finality, and we don't put a lot of effort into making it go back down. If the time goes up, we don't put a lot of effort to make it go back down until it's getting too high. And so when the time to finality plus the time to reach the mirror nodes, so the end-to-end time is getting around 10 seconds, we said, we really would like to keep the end-to-end under 10 seconds, which means time to finality under, 7 seconds or so. In order to do that, we then put a little bit of effort into tweaking it, and it dropped substantially last month. And we'll probably put in a small amount of effort to make some other small tweaks. It'll go down some more, probably a lot more. There are also some big changes we could do to make it faster. We're not going to worry about those. But as we keep adding features, if we add features that slow it down, we add more nodes and it slows, then we will put effort into making it faster as it starts to get too slow, where end-to-end is approaching 10 seconds again. It's what we're doing is we're trying to add features and other big things as fast as we can. And so we're putting effort into other things like worrying about the finality only when it needs it. And so, you saw a big drop last month, got a lot better last month, and it's going to get better again in the future.
Great. Thank you, Leemon. Mance, some council decisions require a majority vote and some require unanimous decisions. Can you explain some of the background behind that thought process and maybe some examples?
Yeah, so I actually had to go and look this up. It's been a long time since we went through the creation of the governance bylaws, right, of the LLC. And by the way, you all can go and see this. I think Lena may publish it. Yeah, there we go. So there's a link that gives an overview of this information. It's all there if you're interested. I'm going to refer to my notes here as we go through this. I'll try to be brief, but a majority of the typical threshold for most decisions that are made is just simple majority. A majority of the members is sort of the standard best practice in association governance, and it ensures that all council decisions have an explicit participation of the majority in those decisions. There is a threshold, 2/3 of the members. This threshold is generally used for extraordinary changes to the council members, such as removing a member before the end of their term or re-electing a member to the second term. As I mentioned earlier, it requires 2/3 vote for a member to get the second term. Of course, we expect that to happen for most, if not all, council members. Then there's the 3/4 of the members as a threshold. Of course, that's an even higher bar. And you know, when thinking about what possibly that could apply to, it would be major corporate changes of the LLC, maybe dissolving the LLC or changing its tax status would require 3/4 of the members. There's another threshold, 80%, more than 80%. It's actually more than 80% of the members. It's used for only one decision. I'm reading my notes. Is used for only one decision of the council. That is the threshold required to require additional capital contributions from the members. So if it were the case, by the way, when a member joins, there's no capital, there's $100 capital contribution to become a member of the LLC. So there's a nominal capital contribution. Hypothetically, if the council wanted to force all the members to contribute more capital, it would require more than 80% of them to vote to do so. Don't expect that to happen, but it's in there. And then finally, unanimous consent of the members. This is the highest possible threshold. It's required so that the original member, which is Swirlds, can basically block certain types of changes to the council. And it can be changing the membership terms, changing node payments, and network pricing principles, not the amounts, but the principles behind which all of that was set up, changing the distribution structure, et cetera. So there are certain things that are sort of fundamental to the model itself that would have just enormous impact. And in that case, it requires a unanimous consent, unanimous agreement on those types of changes.
All right, I know we are running out of time here. I'm going to jump around just a little bit so we can get to maybe 2 more questions. Mance, staying on the council members, do all council member seats have to be filled before trusted nodes and permissionless nodes are possible? Or is this more a function of HBAR being widely distributed?
Yeah, it's certainly, so trusted nodes and permissionless. It's not the case that all council seats have to be filled before trusted nodes are added. We expect community nodes. When we say trusted nodes, what we really mean are nodes that are KYC'd or known to us, which would be community nodes. Community nodes can be added at any time, hypothetically. I mean, there's no need to have 39 council members seated before we add community nodes. There's not even really a need to have 39 council members seated before we add permissionless nodes, or quote, untrusted nodes, nodes that are not KYC'd. The permissionless piece of this has everything to do with coin economics and the broad distribution of the token. And so the two are sort of independent issues.
All right.
I think Leemon already talked at length about some of this earlier in the meeting today.
Great. And then Leemon, This was one that I hadn't heard this story either. So I would love for the community to hear this. When you had your breakthrough and realized that sending 2 hashes to create the hash graph would work, can you describe that initial conversation with Mance? How did you convey that Eureka moment?
Yeah, so that's so much fun. I remember exactly where I was walking when I realized, oh, if you just add 2 hashes to every message, then everyone will know exactly the entire history, and you could run 30-year-old algorithms to make it work. Now, the devil's in the details. It actually took another month to figure out exactly how to get old algorithms to work. They're not exactly the same as the old algorithms. You have to tweak it. It took a long time and a lot of trial and error to figure out exactly how to do all the details. But at the moment that I realized adding 2 hashes would give you the history, I knew the answer was there. It was obvious at that point, yes, this will work. And in the early days when I was showing this to mathematicians, everybody would look at it and say, well, of course that will work. I don't even understand all the details you're describing, but yes, if you add 2 hashes, obviously that's going to give you a history. You can do anything. It was just kind of obvious that you could do consensus with no communication at all. So I remember suddenly realizing that while walking. I remember where I was in College Station at the time when that happened. I told Mance, because this is the way all of our research works, is I tell Mance, hey, I've solved this and I'm excited about it, and I explain it to him. And he listens and he understands these things. And he's good at technical things. He's not just good at business, although he's amazing at that. So I tell him what happens. And, you know, Mance and I always, I'm trying to prove a theorem and I find a solution. I call him and I tell him and I explain it to him. And you learn a lot while you're just talking about something, while you're teaching it. And often, I'll make a discovery and then we'll realize there's a flaw in it. And, you know, we always joke about that. I always joke about that, how, you know, I should really enjoy this for a few minutes before I think about it again, before I realize I was totally wrong. So this is a common thing. Mance is used to this. I'll go through this, or I'll tell him a really cool way of doing something that's really good. And then I'll come back and say, yeah, but here's even better, and explain that one. So this is our common way of doing things. The 2 hashes thing, though, was a little bit different, because there it wasn't, I hope this works, or I hope there's no flaw in my proof. It was just a fundamental thing that's obvious in retrospect. And it was kind of obvious that it was true. The details of how to actually do an algorithm are complicated. And I went through a million versions of that with Mance. And I'd gone through a million versions of that with Mance before this point. But at this point, it was something that was just obviously right. Basically, a hash graph is the obvious right way to do consensus. And then the hash graph consensus algorithm flows out of that. And it's not obvious, but, you know, as you work it out, you kind of end up with the hash graph consensus algorithm. Once you know you're going to have a hash graph, it's kind of, you will kind of end up with something that's going to be very close to the hash graph consensus algorithm. But the hash graph itself was one of those things that was very simple idea. And once you see it, you know that it's just the right way to do consensus. And so Mance and I always do this. We always go back and forth. It's a lot of fun.
Mance, do you remember that?
I remember it well. It's funny because somehow Starbucks ends up being the place that we come to major decisions about the organization. You know, it happens all the time. It happened recently, right? So we had a great Starbucks conversation about a week ago.
Fantastic. Well, I know we are at the top of the hour. I would hope both of you are going to get recaffeinated again after this. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We will have the replay go up live shortly. We will share both when the next town hall will be in November, as well as some of the things that we will do in the interim. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank
you.